Ken Hamilton, are you there? What Alan Williams talked about this morning is going to tie in a lot with what Ken Hamilton is going to teach this afternoon. Um, so we've got Ken, we've got a couple other speakers. We're going to wrap up at 4 o'clock Pacific. We'll have some bonuses for those who stay on. Remember, I tend to be a little bit biased for those who keep their videos on and engage, and we appreciate that just because we want to make this as interactive and immersive as possible. So Ken, do you have a presentation you're going to share? You can go ahead and bring that up.
Yes, we do.
Cool. Yep. So Ken Hamilton is from Cache Valley, Utah. He's visited our ranch at least once. I've heard him speak live several times. He's been on our presentations before. Um, and we talked earlier with Alan Williams about how can we build this, what I'm calling a parallel system, so that if and when the conventional system completely falls apart, we have another system that can replace it without a bunch of collateral damage. I heard in church once, somebody made the comment in church of all places, if we switch to grass-fed, everybody will starve. And I bowed up and I'm like, no, we wouldn't. And then I thought, yeah, actually we would, because we don't have the systems to be able to produce grass-fed beef on the scale that it needs to be produced to feed the people the way that the current system. And I'm not bashing on feedlots. I'm not bashing on conventional agriculture. It was a system that was built, but that we've seen some flaws in it. And we believe, and I believe in my heart, there's other ways that not only build soil health, but end up with a good product on the back end of it, which we saw from Alan Williams' slides. And Ken will talk about this too. I think you probably work with Stefan Van at Utah State, right, Ken, when you're testing?
We have done a lot of testing up at the Utah State uh, laboratory, and so we have a lot of data on this. Been doing it for 5 years now.
Yeah. So that's what we're starting to see is that Ken is going to talk to us about a product that has benefits on the back end, right? We're not just about producing pounds and bushels for cheap and having garbage on the back end. We're about having a quality product that actually regenerates us as human beings. And so let's jump right into it, Ken.
Hey, very good. Thank you, Jared. So our presentation today, Jared and I talked. It's about raising an incredibly healthy and premium quality beef. But the criteria of this has to be that it's not only healthy for the animal, but it's extremely healthy for the consumer. And so those are the principles that we're going to talk about. And so as you guys have been demonstrating in your program, is we're stewards over livestock. And all of these intelligences that we're blessed to work with have a natural law and a divine order to them. And so when we manage those, they have to have the correct feed to match their genetic and their metabolic intelligence. And that optimizes their health and their well-being and also the quality of their life. And so as we look at this, is why would we concern ourselves with how beef is currently being produced? And, as Jared talked about, he said, there's different models. We have the grass-fed model, grazing. We have grain-fed and a feedlot model. A lot of people or producers are turning to sprout and fodder models. Okay. And the problem is cattle and cattle producers are in a steady decline. We're at the lowest inventory in the last 70 years. And America has lost over 107,000 beef cattle farms and ranches in the past 5 years. And the reason isn't they're making so much money that they retire early. The reason is they're not making enough money to stay in business. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, the lack of profitability is we are at about the end of our rope currently with our input costs and our interest rates and our overhead margins. These are very difficult to maintain a profit in these scenarios. And so, what our program is going to talk about is sustainable regenerative cattle production. And you have to have higher revenues in a shorter period of time. You have to reduce your feed costs, it means you're going to improve feed conversion. You're going to have to produce healthier cattle, and you will produce a healthier, superior meat for your consumers. What it is the Omega Balanced Natural Beef program. And this is something that we've worked on now for 18 years. And we've done an extensive amount of testing and research on that. And what we're going to share today is only a fraction of what we have as far as information and resources. But we're going to take and blend and get the very best of the grain-fed qualities, which is the fat, the tenderness, and the marbling, and we're going to blend it and get the very best of grass-fed qualities. And this is a different type of animal. It's better than grass-fed, and it is vastly superior in every possible conceivable way to grain-fed. Now, Jared said, I won't bash grain-fed. I will. It is emphatically not fit for human consumption, period. So, Jared, you're much more of a gentleman than I am. So,
Trying to be too politically correct here.
Jared, that's you. That's not me.
Gotcha. Yep. Yep.
But,
I'm with.
but like I say, you're a better man than I am. So, as we move into the components of this program, it's growing and harvesting optimal forages. Okay. There's a saying, junk in, junk out. We don't go there. We go through a very critical, extensive fermentation process, and we are raising optimal meat. So this is a picture of our prime rib roast. This is grass-fed. Prime rib roast in about 15 to 16 months from birth to finish. Now that's way faster than feedlot, and it's way faster than grass-fed. And we have every bit the quality of feedlot on prime, but we have the healthiest omega-6 to omega-3 balance ratio. And that's critically important because that's the difference between grass-fed and feedlot. These oxidative linolenic acids that are highly inflammatory and disease promoting. We eliminate that altogether. So this is how we do this. Okay, the omega balanced natural beef is balanced in its essential fatty acid ratios. That means one omega-6 to one omega-3. That's the ratio our bodies are designed to run on. We have incredible flavor. It is very tender because it's young. Our beef will grade prime or choice if we kill it early. We have incredible feed efficiency. It has higher nutrition, higher energy, and will produce our meats, depending on where we are in location, anywhere from 15 to 18 months. And our forages and our products all qualify as organic. And so here's an example of just the difference in fermented forage, our omega balanced natural beef versus grass fed. And as we look at this, what I want to emphasize here is because we have such a greater feed conversion on the same forage that you would feed a grass-fed animal, we can grow two animals in the same time that you can grow one on less feed. And so this produces, instead of waiting 2.5 to 3 years for a revenue stream, we're in that 15 to 18 month range, depending on how heavy you want to do this. And so you pick up not only a premium, an extra premium on another animal, but you have a feed savings. And so there's about a difference of $3,700 that you can pick up, which is a huge additive to your profit margins. Again, we have to raise the ranch revenues and we have to decrease costs. That's how producers stay in business. when you look at the grain-fed model, right, they finish faster than grass-fed. But the problem is their cost to finish is much higher. So when you compare a grain-fed to omega balanced beef, is we have a much lower cost to finish, and ours will qualify as a grass-fed. So you're still picking up an additional premium of over $3,000 on just improving your feed conversion and your time. We did a study here in Utah, when we first came out and relocated all of our research from South Carolina, where we took starting animals at 550 pounds. We went to 1,250. Hanging carcass weight was 740. The range was about 15 to 17 months. And we had just under a 6-to-1 feed conversion for our animals. And that is way less than half of just normal grass fed. But again, we'll explain why this is happening with the fermented forages and those very specific but priority uh, blend of microorganisms that we use. So this is through fermentation. This is the biological breakdown of forages. And in our program, we use absolutely no grains of any kind. And the animals that we want in the program couldn't or shouldn't have ever had grain. Here's the problem with the seed oils from all of these grains is once it's in the tissue, it has a very, very extensive life. And so it would take approximately 6 to 7 years to get all of the seed oils out of the tissues. And that goes for humans and animals. So we don't want to start with grain because it will show up in the meat at harvest time. So we want grass-fed animals that have been raised on milk and grass. Those come into the program, and that's how we can maintain that incredibly healthy 1-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 balanced ratio. And so it takes a little bit of a paradigm shift because most of livestock is based on dry matter intake. So I've got to get so much dry matter into these animals every day to get X results out the back door. The problem is what we're putting into those animals is so indigestible, is so insoluble that very little of it is actually transferred into feed conversion. And that's where the delay comes. And so we want to look at forage that are fermented. We want to look at them broken down. We want those microbial metabolites. And we want those higher amounts of nutrition available because that provides the enemy or the energy for faster growth and for fat accumulation. So why do we ferment? Right? It is critical that we pre-digest the by using high moisture forages because that microorganism is the intelligence that breaks the feed down and puts it into smaller components. Those components hold all these energies and these microbial metabolites. There'll be new compounds that come from the microbial processes that aren't in the plants. These are nutrition. And so we want to make those available because the plants are loaded with this stuff. So we need to take grasses and forages from 15-to-1 down to 6 to 7-to-1. There is not enough time in a 24 or 36 or 48-hour period to digest very much of the nutrients we feed these cattle or any ruminant. And so let's look at what we're dealing with and the carbohydrate structure of plants, where we go from the very simplest to the most complex. So we have our simple sugars, our monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides into our polysaccharides. Now, the wonderful thing about the plant world is it is all monosaccharides. Okay, there are 5 groups and 28 sugars, and in the world of the plant kingdom, there are no more sugars that build everything. 5 groups, 28 sugars. Everything else is just a combination of those 28 sugars. So a disaccharide is just 2 monosaccharides. Oligosaccharides are 3 to 10, and polysaccharides are just lots of monosaccharides. So you look at the primary plant metabolites, everything is built off of carbohydrates. Your proteins, carbohydrate base, nitrogen and sulfur. Your fats, lipids, oils, carbohydrate base with a phosphate. So as you look at this, all of these carbohydrates have an atomic weight. And the more carbons and hydrogens and oxygens we add, the bigger the molecules get. And so when you look at these and we start combining them, now what's happening is our atomic masses in our disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides go through the roof. And this causes these massive collections of carbohydrate chains to be indigestible. And so this is the process of putting plants together and making them indigestible, insoluble. So our job is to deconstruct all of this plant construction. We don't get the energy out of it until we break this thing down. So when you start looking at the glucose units, which is what our cells burn, okay, you begin to accumulate in these more complex carbohydrates. The more glucose units that we put in, we start increasing the atomic mass up to where they're completely indigestible. So you look at starches and pectins, more digestible. Hemicellulose, not so much. Cellulose is very difficult. Lignans, we get none of those. So when you start looking at your carbohydrate structure of plants in the digestibility table, all of your simple sugars are highly digestible. But when we start getting into the pectins, now we start reducing that digestibility. And when we get into hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin, we've got upwards of 80% of the plant that's either partially digestible or non-digestible altogether. And so that 24-hour period just doesn't allow us that time to pass through and get the nutrition out of this that we actually need. And so when you look at manure, we have 24 to not more than 48 hours in the rumen. Yet that same material can take up to 3 to 5 years to decompose in the soil. So you can just imagine how much we lost by having such a short period of time in the rumen. And anaerobic decomposition is way slower than aerobic decomposition in the soil. And so we begin to understand that these are very, very complex plant components that we have to pre-digest. We have to have the microbes take these things apart and reduce them and make these insoluble, unavailable components into small, soluble, available compounds that changes our feed efficiency. And this is what the right biology does. It not only does it in the soil, it does it in us, it does it in livestock. And so the first component is growing incredibly good forages. We don't want poor, low quality forages because they don't contain the minerals and nutrition and the plant components. We want these high quality grasses and legumes. And so our process involves we're going to cut and we're going to windrow. And then we're going to come through and we're going to chop, bag, or pit this material. And so here's a picture of one of our fields where we've taken and we've cut the material. And the next day, so it's still a high moisture, we're chopping and we're putting this into a truck, and we're going to bring this in to our bagging operation and start putting up this high moisture forage. The yellow tank on the chopper is filled with our biological fermentation product. So we're applying microorganisms, our fermentive microbes, at the chopper and bringing this into the truck. And we have our choppers so that they have a very precise, clean, fine cut. We want more surface area in our forages to be able to be digested by the microbes because this changes feed conversion. Long stem fibers are very, very difficult to digest, so we want them chopped up. And so this surface area, the greater surface area is better for fermentation. The greatest potential for nutrient release, and it works incredibly well in bags, open pits, or silos. And it also has the lowest spoilage potential. And we like to have our fermentation sites near our fields because it's much better to transport. Once we get this done, we bring the truck into the bagging operation, and we're simply putting this through a bagger into silage bags. And right here, we're actually applying a little bit more fermentation, biological culture into this material as it's going into the bag. And so we want a very, very aggressive fermentation on this forage that we're putting up because your microbes are responsible for your feed conversion. When you look at a rumen, the first everything in front of the stomach is a fermentation chamber. It's to break down. The problem is it's not there long enough. So now what we're doing is we're putting those digestive fermentation microbes in with the feed, high moisture, and we're bagging it up. And this allows us to pre-digest and ferment these forages, increasing the feed conversion. So we end up with a pit, which works wonderful. We do the bags, and we want it in there at 55 to 65% moisture. The rates for the bioferment vary anywhere from half a gallon to a gallon. And you can also add a dynamine mineral uh, at about 1 pound per ton. And these minerals are actually there to encourage the microbial enzymatic production in fermentation. And so we can explain more about that when we get into the program. But again, our optimal ranges for our forages are between 55 and 65%, and we test these religiously as we put up our forages. We did forages on June 27th. We cut, chopped, and bagged it. It was a grass, alfalfa, clover, and other forage mix. In just 2 months, we opened the bag and tested it. It had a wonderful pH of 4.34, and we want it to be below 4.5. And the moisture content was still 59.7. And so this fermentation was ready in just over 2 months. It's great to feed, makes excellent, excellent feed. And so the many benefits of fermentation is it changes what normally occurs in grass-fed into what typically you see in grain-fed type meat. Okay, we pick up that marbling, we pick up that massive extra energy because we're converting that feed way better. And so our proprietary microbial blend is all natural. They're beneficial anaerobes, and they're all non-GMO. They're food grade, organically certified, and they're fermentation oriented, but we have a blend of excellent fiber decomposers. And these microbes are able to degrade glyphosate and eliminate mycotoxins and aflatoxins. And this is really important because there's a lot of areas in the country that get a lot of rain, and they have trouble putting up feeds without mycotoxins and molds and those type of things. And so we have done this over and over. We did in 2014, we had some material in Idaho, some alfalfa that got rained on for 3 weeks, three different occasions. And it was in windrows, dry on the top, but moldy, black gray mold underneath. And and we were able to take that forage and actually clean it up and bale it and sale it. And so here's the results of some of these tests. The first one is this is their first crop of alfalfa that was cut. It was dried down to 12% and it was baled with no rain. It's textbook perfect for green hay. However, look at the aflatoxin G1. It has 54 parts per billion. The limit is 20. Now, this is hay that's got no rain and dried down to 12%. This is something that you do not want in any feed because it will reduce weight gain, it will affect milk production, fertility, and cause liver lesions. So this is not a mycotoxin that you want it showing up in your forages. This is the second crop of alfalfa that was severely molded. With 1 gallon of our bioferment culture on here, this is what the tests look like. There were no aflatoxins G1, no G2s, no B1s, no B2s. I mean, we were so far below the limits, and this feed would have been completely toxic to even feed any animals before it was fermented and baled up. So quality forages are absolute necessity to have as we go into these programs. And again, you want to have it cut young and short stemmed, and we want this all cut just before it goes into the reproductive stages. So here's an example of some of the testing that we have done. We test our forages so that we know exactly what's the omega-6 to the omega-3 ratio is in the forages that we will feed. And so pasture grasses, they actually have a positive ratio of high omega-3s to low omega-6s. This is wonderful. Even Scottish thistle is about 2 omega-3s to 1,6. Alfalfa, the same. And sorghum is 2 to 1. And a lot of people are familiar with flaxseed. It has 4 omega-3s to 1 omega-6. Well, our BMT forage is 2.09 omega-3s to 1,6. So this is an excellent forage to be putting into our livestock. Sorghum that we tested in South Dakota, 2.09 to 1. Now, this is corn. So corn is a major component of feedlots. So as we look at this, we wanted to understand what was happening in the plant in relation to corn. So we took a particular plant and the ear. And what we did is we sectioned off the plant separate and tested it, and then we tested the kernels off of the ear. And what we found is the plant itself has 2 omega-3s to 1 omega-6. The ear, the kernel, had 33.88 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. Now, this is where your toxicity comes from. It's from the grain. And so the problem with corn and feedlots is virtually almost all the corn we raise in this country is genetically modified. And so that corn is loaded with not only altered proteins because of the genetic engineering, but it's accompanied with glyphosate. And we cannot have that in our program. We can use conventional or organic corn without the ear. But the only problem that I see with corn is it's indigestible. It's very difficult to get good feed conversion off of corn. It's a very high cellulose and lignin plant. And so it matters extensively what cattle are fed. Okay, and this is we're going to get into a little bit more science about health here. Is cattle are what they eat. So, and this comes back to grains that are filled with seed oils. Okay, these are polyunsaturated fats, high in omega 6s, which are linoleic acid. They're oxidative and they're highly inflammatory. Now, natural grasses are have saturated fats. They're high in omega 3s, they're antioxidative and they're anti-inflammatory. And so this is why we lived on grass-fed cattle, grass-fed bison, grazed livestock for centuries and millenniums without disease. Grass does not cause disease. I promise you, corn will cause every known degenerative disease that we have. And you can't escape that reality when you feed this. So when you go back and you look at the natural shift from grazing to feedlots, it occurred over a period of time. Pre-1900, we grazed everything. We only had 5% of beef lot or beef in feedlots in 1935. With the introduction of antibiotics, we had 66% of the beef coming out of feedlots in 63. And 10 years ago, 97% of the beef in grocery stores comes out of feedlots. Well, what are they feeding? Basically corn-fed diets. So when you look at this, so we've taken the grains, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of oxidizing inflammatory grains. GMO corn came in at almost 35 to 1. Now, that corn we just showed you recently came in at 33.88 to 1. Oats come in at around 27 to 1. Non-GMO corn came in at around 26. Wheat and barley stay right around that 15 to 1 range. And field peas, green peas, yellow peas run in at about 8 to 9 omega 6s to 1 omega 3. So these grains, when they're fed as grains, become highly, highly oxidative and inflammatory. Yet on the other side, our pasture grasses, our different forages have a very antioxidative, anti-inflammatory property because the threes are actually higher than the sixes. So this is really critical. And so this is what happens as a result when animals are fed these grains. You look at these omega-6 to omega-3 balances in these different meats. Is we took a pork chop, which is grain, and pork are mostly fed grains and corn. And so they're going to be very, very high in omega-6s versus omega-3s. So a prime pork chop out of a national grocery store chain, 27 to 1. Now remember, our bodies work on 1 to 1. And this massive, excessive amount of omega 6s causes this cellular disruptive process and it's metabolically dysfunctional. Internet beef is we have very expensive meat at 26 and a half to 1. This prime rib steak from this internet beef site costs $154 a pound. They sell it as the best beef in the world, and it is incredibly toxic. The other one, uh, and you've all heard of these companies, uh, theirs came in at 20 and a half to 1. There's the RBR beef is grass-fed and corn finished. So for the last several months, it's fed corn. And what's happening is you can see that instead of coming in at a very low, even omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, the corn moves it up to or 7.4 to 1. Store-bought lamb. This is New Zealand lamb. New Zealand has grass all year round. This came in at 7.14 to 1 because it's grain finished. To get the marbling in the lamb, get the fat in it, they grain finish it. Organic chicken, almost 12 to 1. And people think, well, if I'm eating organic, I'm eating healthy. What I'm telling you is if it's fed corn, even organic corn, you still have this oxidation inflammation property with it. Generic chicken is we tested it at 16 to 1. Generic eggs, 14 and a half to 1. Bison, grain-fed bison is no different than grain-fed beef. It's 21 to 1. This study came out of the University of North Dakota and University of Nebraska with bison in Canada. We took a local grain-fed, hay-fed bison that came in at 3.6 to 1. And again, the grain elevated the omega 6s higher than the 3s. We've tested grass-fed beef, which is 1.4 to 2.2. And we've tested grass-fed bison, excuse me, at 2.2. And so these grass-fed meats are going to be low in those omega 6 to omega 3 ratios. The omega balance program, our omega 6s and omega 3s are very, very close in that 1-to-1 ratio, as is our bison, as are our lamb. And so again, it's what the animals are fed. It's not the type of animal that makes the difference here. And so again, when we look at these programs, we have to have the right essential fatty acids. They have to have incredible flavor because of the proper fats that are there, which we need to be healthy. And ours will grade choice and prime. We get a premium for that. We have improved feed efficiency, which means we're using less feed and we're producing a lot higher revenue stream because we can produce these animals in a much shorter period of time. And so this is another analysis of what we did. This is one of our T-bone steaks. This is grass-fed, and its balance was 0.836 to 1 omega-3. We had honest to goodness grass-fed, and you know because it was 1.34 to 1. And then we had the Wagyu that was 6.63 to 1. And here's the picture of the steaks. And you pay a premium for the grass-fed because it has a healthy ratio, but it's going to be tough. It's going to lack flavor. Now, the Wagyu was nicely marbled, but way more toxic. And so here's a kind of a little running history that we've done. A lot of this was tested at Utah State University and microbac laboratories over the years. And so you can see we have a pretty consistent omega 6 to omega 3 ratio on all kinds of meat, our beef, our bison, our lamb. And then in 2023, we ran a different test. We allowed the forages that we were fermenting to go past reproductive stage. And what it did is as cereals begin to accumulate the seed material, they start increasing in omega 6s within the plant. And so what it did is you go back and you look at that last year in 23, is we had 1.68 to 1. And so we got some slightly elevated omega 6s because we harvested these grasses late. And so that's another test that we learned from, that we don't want to go into the reproductive stage too far because it will affect our meat ratio. Now, this ratio at 1.68 to 1 is still fine. Anything under 2.5 isn't going to cause a problem. And so this is what we want to get into here on our beef, is feedlot beef is unhealthy. And most of everything that we buy in the store is going to be feedlot beef, and they're fed grains. Now, there's a process that goes on with omega-6 linoleic acid that peroxidizes and breaks down. Okay, and this peroxidation process goes into a lot of different toxic components. Now, when we, I'm going to try to make this really brief, and so there's two major problems here that occur with omega 6s. First is our bodies are made up of 100, approximately 100 trillion cells. Every one of our cells has a bilayer inside the cell and outside the cell. And then we have a protein carbohydrate structure in the center, kind of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. Bread on top, bread on bottom, peanut butter and jelly in the middle. Now, the problem is our cells were designed to be built with very stable, healthy fats. Omega-6 linoleic acid is a very oxidizing, unstable fat. And so when we have a high omega-6 component in our diet, our body doesn't sort it out and get rid of it. It builds our cells with these oxidizing fats. So that dysfunctions our cellular membrane, not just the membrane of our cell, but also the membrane of our mitochondria within our cell. So not the cell membranes are not functioning properly, letting things in, letting things out. They're oxidizing. And the moment you oxidize something, you create inflammation. Inflammation comes in to heal things. But as we load up our diet with these dangerous omega 6s that oxidize, our body is in a constant state of repair, which is a constant state of inflammation. That's the first problem. Okay, is we're cellular and metabolically dysfunctional. The second major problem is these omega-6 linoleic acids break down into cellular toxins. And these aren't minor cellular toxins. These are major cellular poisons. So you have a group of hydroxynonanols, malondialdehyde. Okay, it's a very close cousin to formaldehyde. And so what do we use formaldehyde for? It's very, very good at keeping people dead. Okay, that's not a component. It's not a breakdown component you want in your cells. You have over 100 oxidized linoleic acid metabolites. You have acrolein and you have carboxyethyl pyrrole. All of these create a host of cellular poisons. Now, these are affecting the cell, and we're going to look at this. So you're mutagenic. They induce mutations in your cell. Your genotoxicity. Okay, this is damage to your genetic information. Carcinogenic is cancer. Your tetrogenicity is your damage to your fetus. Your cytotoxicity is your toxicity within the cell. Atherogenic is your formation of your plaque in your arteries. That's all of your cardiovascular diseases. Thrombogenic is your blood disorders and your clotting, and your obesogenic is causing obesity. Okay. Dr. Chris Kenobi did excellent research on this. And these are the cellular toxins that come from this. And so what happens is when we partake of these components that are within our animal, this process continues in us. And so as a result of this, we have shifted from pre-1900s from infectious diseases now to degenerative diseases. Okay, this is what's killing us today, is all of these metabolic degenerative diseases. And so when did we start all this nonsense? Well, it has several basic components, but we started going into introducing cotton seed oil into our diets in 1866. We started working with taking whole grains and we started refining the flour. We started mixing margarine in with animal fats in 1871. And the vegetable and the seed oil business really got underway in 1880, Crisco 1911. And then you go on with the margarine, the seed oils, and then our government, in its infinite wisdom and full stupidity, then said, we've got to get everybody off of natural animal fats. No, no butter, no lard, no tallow. All of these animal fats are bad, and we're all going to healthy seed oils. And that was then pushed through government mandates through our schools, and then all of the food companies jumped on. And as a result of that, we now have over 75 metabolic diseases we didn't have 100 years ago. And so when you look at the catastrophic health effects of these decisions, is we didn't have these. The first documented heart attack in the United States was 1918. And we just didn't have them. And you go back into the early 1800s, 1 in 200 people died of cancer. Now 1 in 2 are going to get it. Those are massive increases. And we have Americans with huge metabolic disorders. And so when you look at this, over 90% of our population, actually it's really close to 95% of our population is metabolically unhealthy. 73% are overweight. At least 60% have one serious metabolic disorder. Over 50% have high blood pressure. Almost 50% have cardiovascular disease. When you look at diabetes, pre-diabetes, we're at 50%. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, okay, that's pushing 45%. We're now at a 43% obesity rate, and we have 40% of our population has multiple metabolic diseases. And so you can go down and down and down the list. We've created all of this nonsense in the last less than 100 years. And so our seed oil consumption has gone from virtually nothing to almost 80% or higher of our fat intake today. And so we have a massive increase of these seed oils. And you look back to 1865, less than 1% of our calories came from seed oil. Now we're in excess of 25%, it's closer to 30%. So it's been a massive success in switching people off of natural animal fats and demonizing those stable, saturated, monosaturated fats that we've lived on for thousands and thousands of years, and we switched to the seed oils. And so this is the fallout. When you go back to 1850, omega 6s composed 1 to 2% of the human fat tissue, and they currently compose almost 30%. And so you go back and you just look at the charts and you can see our accumulation of this in our adipose tissue. And now you come back and you look at what these effects have been through the ages as things have climbed. And here's the struggle, is what we've been doing to produce cattle in the past is a road to failure. And now is the time that we have to change things, because we're losing cattle producers at the rate of almost 20,000 producers per year. We're producing an incredibly, incredibly unhealthy, toxic meat product. And this isn't just in beef. It's in pork, it's in poultry, it's in eggs. Okay, these are our major protein and meat sources. So we're working extensively right now to produce chicken and eggs, and we have them at 1 to 1. We're working on pork to take it down from the 20s and 30s of omega 6s to one omega 3 to 1 to 1. And so we have those tests and those progresses in place, those programs in place to change that meat as well, because it all needs to be changed. And so what it gives the producer, the cattle producer, a chance to do is use the right forages, go through a fermentation process, but come out the other end with an incredibly healthy animal that you've stewarded from the beginning of its life until it's processed and slaughtered for human consumption, but you're also giving the benefit of that incredible nutrition and meat to the consumer so that it isn't affecting their life negatively. And so that's the program that we wanted to present to you today because we have done this extensively. If you follow the program, it is 100% on spot every time. There are no failures in this. And so that is our presentation for today. There's a lot of information. We've hurried through this so that we didn't go too long. But here's our contact information. And Jared, we're more than happy to provide the PowerPoint material for you for people to go back and look at and review because there's more detail in a lot of these slides than I spoke about. And so, Jared, do you have some questions? Do you want
I
to
do.
have a
Yeah,
question?
I do. Thank you, Ken. That was a lot to consume in a short amount of time, but we've gotten some good comments. We'll jump through a couple of these. One of the questions was, what's the difference between the fermented product and traditional silage?
Okay, is we haven't tested everybody else's biology. We don't know what other microorganism groups can and can't do. I do know specifically that we have an incredibly effective group at decomposing glyphosate. Now, I don't know of any other groups fermentation product that will do that. We also have a very great group select microorganisms that decompose these fibers. And, and so we're able to obtain excellent feed conversion because of the breakdown of these fibers. The other thing is corn silage. If it's silaged with the grain in, it's going to elevate the omega-6 ratio in the meat. It'll come out at 5, 6, 7, 8 to 1. And and that again, it's an inflammatory property that you're going to pass on to the animal as being unhealthy and pass on to the consumer as being unhealthy.
Okay, good. There's another one about feeding seed oil grains to poultry. And I also had the question about that, to a monogastric to a pig. Um, do you see the same effects of the imbalance of the omega-3 ratios in poultry and in monogastrics?
Jared, it's actually amplified. You have some digestive processes in the rumen in your beef and your lamb and your bison that actually hydrolyze or break down some of the omega-6s. Monogastrics don't do that. So you get much more direct reflection of high omega-6s in monogastrics than you do in beef.
Hmm. So what do you suggest there where they don't, yeah, what, what do you feed them? I guess should
Okay,
be
okay.
the follow-up question.
So what we're doing with our chicken program is we actually can put some different type of grain blends together that are actually will test in at 1 to 1. And when you feed that, you get the chicken, the meat at 1 to 1. You also get the eggs at 1 to 1.
Mm.
Now, and then the next thing that we're doing is we're also going through this fodder program where we take these seed oils or the seed oil grains, the wheat, the barley, the peas, and different grains, and we sprout them and we grow them. And as they grow, the omega-6s deplete. The problem with everybody's fodder programs, the barley that they're sprouting and they feed after 6 or 7 days, the seed starts at 15 to 1. Well, by 7 days, when the seed runs out of gas, you still have 7 or 8 omega 6s to one omega 3. So when you feed that to your livestock, it's perfectly reflected in their meat, Jared. And so you have, I know the grass-fed industry says, yes, sprouts are grass-fed, but you have a grain-fed property to the meat. Those
Mhm.
omega 6s aren't gone. And so we're developing the program to put in the biological and organic nutrition to grow the wheat and the barley long enough to get the sixes out. Nobody's done that. We're going to do
Cool.
it. And we have other seeds that will actually grow themselves right out. So we've taken all of these seeds at the beginning, we've taken them at 3 days, we've taken them at 7 days, 12 days, 14 days, 18 days, and we've tested where all of the omega 6 to omega 3 ratios are. And we've done lots and lots and lots of these tests. And so we know how long we have to grow things to get that balanced omega 6, omega 3. And then when we feed those to pigs and to chickens, it completely changes the meat profile. Oh, and by the way, pigs do incredibly well on fermented forages. They grow like crazy. We have two groups of pigs that are on fermented forages. We have Berkshire and Durocs, and they are doing amazing. No grains, no vaccines, no antibiotics. They're all on fermented alfalfa, fermented grasses, fermented legumes, and they do amazing. And they'll grow probably in half the time as pasture raised pork. And so we'll put on the fat, we'll put on the marbling, and we'll have that incredible flavor and that health. So we'll fix the pork and we'll fix the chicken. They're next.
Cool. Cool. Very good. And probably time for one more question, which could is not a short question, but what are you doing on the soil health side? If you're removing those crops and you're taking them off the field.
Okay.
Real briefly on the soil health side, how you're working on the fields was a question that somebody had.
Okay, that's an incredibly good question because the better your forages, the better your fermentation, the better your feed conversion, the better your meat. So our main business is is regenerative agriculture. So we use our own microorganisms, our own minerals that we treat the seeds with when we put them in the soil. We're soil testing our soils and we're putting in natural minerals. Okay, now we're not using NP and K commercial salt and acid based products. We're using biological microorganisms and naturally occurring minerals. Okay, so our whole fertility is we treat the seed that we want to plant. We have we use a lot of organic humates. We use soft rock phosphate, elemental sulfur, gypsum, whatever we need to get our calcium, our mineral bases where they need to be, our base saturation. And then we use a lot of compost microbial mineral tea. That means that we're growing our microbes in our tanks, we're putting them out through our watering systems, and we're letting microbes grow our plants so that we have incredibly high bricks, high nutrient dense forages. We want high chlorophyll, we want high bricks. Then we harvest it. Those plants have wonderful nutrition. That gives the biology something in fermentation to work with. And then we get that all of that plant accumulation broken back down into feed conversion. And so, yeah, it starts in the soil. And we're
Yep.
using all of our own biological and natural mineral products to raise all of our own forages.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and that maybe in the next event that we do, we can take that approach. There are some videos on your YouTube channel, which is what is your YouTube channel?
Uh, Oh my goodness, that's a really good one. You can go to biomineralstechnologies.com and you can
Okay.
go into our whole educational system. And there's a lot of videos on that because our main business is crops, nutrition, and agriculture. I mean,
Yeah.
what money we make off of that, we support this very bad habit of growing really good meat, Jared.
Yeah.
And so,
That's Yeah, and that his products work. I've got on our YouTube channel, it's was quite a while ago, one of the very first ones on that YouTube channel. You've got a really good video on there, and I think you're on at least one other one in there. So, Ken, our time is up. I wish we could spend the whole afternoon um, delivering and answering everybody's questions. If you want to take a minute or have your helper take a minute and respond to any of the ones in the chat, you're sure welcome to do that, Ken. We're going to roll into our next speaker. But everybody, please give Ken a big virtual round of applause, some emojis, some happy signs, some thumbs up. And we appreciate you being here today, Ken. It's been an honor to have you with us.
sure, great opportunity and good to see you again, Jared.